My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 54 years old and I have lived on a 40-acre plot in Okanagan County, Washington for just over 30 years. I am a retired land surveyor. For most of my life, my work involved defining boundaries and measuring physical space with precision equipment. I trusted numbers more than intuition. If something could be measured, it could be understood. That belief shaped how I lived. My property is a mix of ponderosa pine and exposed basalt. It shares a 2-mile border with the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. Because of that location, I've always been careful about routine. Predictability matters when you live that far out. In the autumn of 2022, I began my usual winter preparations. One part of that routine is a weekly inspection of the north perimeter fence. It's a basic 5-strand barbed wire line meant to keep stray cattle from nearby grazing leases off my land. I've walked that fence hundreds of times. On Tuesday, October 11th at approximately 9 a.m., I reached the northwest corner of the property. That's when I noticed something that didn't fit. There was a stack of 5 stones placed on a cedar stump about 3 feet inside my fence line. The stones were smooth and gray, worn down evenly by water. River rocks. That detail stood out immediately. The geology of my land is volcanic basalt and fractured granite. River-worn stones don't exist there. The closest source is the Similkameen River, more than 4 miles away, with a significant elevation change. I remember standing there longer than necessary, trying to justify how they could have arrived. I didn't log it. At the time, I convinced myself it was harmless. Maybe a hiker crossed over from the forest boundary, even though there's no marked trail in that area. I knocked the stones off the stump and continued my inspection. A week later, on October 18th, I found them again. Same time, same stump, same 5 stones. Arranged by size, largest on the bottom. That repetition bothered me more than the stones themselves. I sat on a nearby rock for half an hour, listening. No footsteps, no voices, no sign of recent movement. The pine needles were undisturbed. Carrying 5 pounds of stone over that terrain would take effort. Care. On October 25th, I changed my schedule deliberately. I inspected the fence on a Monday evening instead of Tuesday morning. The stump was empty. I stayed concealed nearby until after dark. Nothing happened. But when I returned the next morning at 9 a.m., the stones were back. That was the first moment I felt something shift. Not fear. More like the quiet realization that timing mattered to whoever was doing this, and that they were aware of mine. I increased observation. I still own a Leica spotting scope from my surveying days. From my back porch, I can see a basalt ridge about 400 yards north, just inside the forest boundary. On October 27th at 6:45 a.m., I scanned the ridge. At the highest point, there was a stone cairn, about 4 feet tall. Through the scope, I could clearly see the texture of the rocks. Smooth, pale, river stones. I calculated the volume automatically. Roughly 150 to 200 stones. Close to 400 pounds of material, transported uphill overnight. I climbed the ridge that afternoon. The cairn was solid, carefully balanced. It wasn't decorative. It was deliberate. When I stood behind it and looked back, I felt something I didn't expect. From that position, the line of sight pointed directly into my kitchen window. I didn't take it apart. Instead, I returned home and installed a Browning trail camera facing the cedar stump. Burst fire mode. 3 images per trigger. For 6 nights, nothing happened. One mule deer. I almost felt embarrassed for how closely I was watching. On the 7th night, November 3rd, the camera activated at 2:22 a.m. The first photo showed a man standing 10 feet from the stump, roughly 6 feet tall. Heavy tan work jacket, dark pants. His face was visible, calm, neutral. He wasn't looking at the stones. He was looking directly into the camera. In the second photo, 1 second later, he hadn't moved. Same posture, same expression. The camera continued triggering every minute for the next hour. The man didn't shift his weight. He didn't blink. He stood perfectly still, arms at his sides, watching. At 3:22 a.m., the triggers stopped. The final image showed nothing. I went out later that morning. There were no new stones. No footprints. No compressed needles. For a man of that size, that absence felt wrong. That evening, I stayed inside with the lights off. I used the scope to look at the ridge. The cairn was gone. I lowered the scope toward my driveway. The cairn had been rebuilt at the end of it, 30 feet from my mailbox. It had been moved and reconstructed while I was inside the house. I haven't contacted the authorities. No laws have been broken. No threats have been made. But every morning for the last 14 days, I found a single river rock on my porch. I stopped moving them. They're lined up beside my door now. I've listed the property for sale. I haven't mentioned the stones in the disclosure. There isn't a logical way to explain them. My name is Marcus. I am 39 years old, and for the last 12 years, I've worked as a long-haul courier for a medical logistics firm. My route takes me through the back roads of Georgia and South Carolina, delivering temperature-sensitive supplies to small-town clinics. I prefer the night shift. There's no traffic, and I find the rhythm of the road relaxing. In the summer of 2023, I was assigned a new stop in a town called Oconee. It's a small place, mostly timber industry and quiet neighborhoods. To get there from the main hub, I have to take Highway 28, a two-lane road that cuts through dense forest. About 3 weeks into the new route, I saw a car. It was an old sedan, maybe an early 2000s Buick, silver or gray. It was parked on the shoulder, hazards blinking. Being a regular on these roads, I usually stop. You never know when someone's phone died or they've hit a deer. I pulled over about 20 yards behind the Buick. I left my engine running and my high beams on. As I walked up to the driver's side window, I saw a woman. She looked to be in her late 60s. She was sitting very straight, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She didn't look at me when I tapped on the glass. I asked if she was okay. She rolled the window down just an inch. She said, "I'm just waiting for the light to change." I looked around. We were in the middle of a national forest. There wasn't a traffic light for 15 miles in either direction. I told her that as politely as I could. I thought maybe she was confused or having a medical issue. She just pointed ahead into the dark. "The light," she repeated. "It's almost green." I looked where she was pointing. There was nothing but the black silhouette of the trees and the empty asphalt. I offered to call a tow truck or the highway patrol for her. She didn't respond. She just rolled the window back up and kept staring forward. I waited for a few minutes, feeling uneasy. Eventually, I got back in my van and drove off. When I looked in my rearview mirror, her hazards were still blinking in the dark. 2 nights later, I saw the Buick again. Same spot, same hazards. I didn't stop this time. I figured the police would have seen her by now. But as I passed, I glanced over. She wasn't in the driver's seat. She was sitting in the back, behind the driver's side, looking out the window at the forest. For the next month, that car was there every Tuesday and Thursday. It became a fixture of the route. I stopped being afraid and started being curious. I even started calling her the Lady of 28 to my dispatcher. He told me to stay away from her. One night in August, it was raining hard. One of those southern downpours where you can barely see the hood of your truck. I saw the silver Buick ahead. The hazards weren't on this time. The car was just there. As I got closer, I saw that the driver's door was wide open. The interior light was on, casting a dim yellow glow into the rain. I felt a sense of obligation. I pulled over. The rain was deafening on the roof of my van. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the Buick. The car was empty. But it wasn't just empty, it was stripped. The seats were gone. The dashboard had been unscrewed. The carpet was pulled up. It looked like someone had spent hours meticulously dismantling the interior. I shone my light into the back. On the floorboards, where the seat used to be, there was a stack of papers. They were wet from the rain. I picked one up. It was a logbook. It had dates and times. August 12th, 2:14 a.m. White Sprinter van. Speed 54 miles per hour. August 14th, 2:16 a.m. White Sprinter van. Speed 55 miles per hour. It went back for months. Every single night I had driven that route, she had recorded my arrival down to the second. Under the last entry, which was that night's date, it just said, He's stopping. I didn't wait around. I got back in my van and I drove. I didn't call it in until I reached the clinic in Oconee. When the deputies went out there an hour later, they found the car. It was still empty, still dismantled. But they told me something that I still think about every time I drive at night. The car had been reported stolen in 2004. The woman who owned it had been missing for nearly 20 years. I still worked the night shift, but I took a different route. It adds 40 minutes to my trip, but I don't mind the extra time. I don't like the idea of being part of someone's logbook. My name is Robert Linwood. I am 42 years old, and I've been a property manager for an apartment complex on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, for the last 6 years. It's a standard complex, 12 buildings, 3 floors each. It's mostly young professionals and a few retirees. My job is predictable: leaky faucets, noisy neighbors, and move-out inspections. In January of last year, I received a maintenance request for Unit 304 in Building G. The request was simple: strange noise in the walls. The tenant was a man named Arthur. He was in his 80s, very quiet, always paid his rent on time. He'd lived there since the place was built. I went up on a Wednesday afternoon. Arthur let me in. The apartment was spotless. It smelled like peppermint and old paper. He led me to the hallway near the bathroom. "Listen," he said. I stood there for a good 5 minutes. I heard the hum of the refrigerator. I heard the heater kick on. I didn't hear anything in the walls. I told him it might just be the pipes settling. The building is older and the cold weather makes things creak. He nodded, but he looked disappointed. "It's rhythmic," he said, "like someone is typing." I checked the plumbing access behind the shower. Nothing. I checked the attic space above his unit. Just insulation and dust. I told him I'd keep an ear out and I left. A week later, another request. Same unit. The noise is louder. I went back. This time I brought a stethoscope. I'm a thorough person. I went to the same spot in the hallway. I pressed the stethoscope to the drywall. For a moment it was silent. Then I heard it. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't a pipe. Arthur was right. It was rhythmic. It sounded like someone was taking a small hammer and gently striking the wooden studs inside the wall. I went to the unit next door, 305. I knocked, but no one answered. The records showed it was currently vacant. The previous tenant had moved out a month prior. I used my master key and went into 305. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no power, just the afternoon sun hitting the carpet. I went to the wall shared with Arthur's unit. I listened. Nothing. I went back to Arthur. "I think it's just air in the lines, Arthur. I'll have the HVAC guy look at it." He looked at me with very clear, very tired eyes. "It's not the lines, Stephen. It's answering me." I asked him what he meant. He took a pen and tapped on the wall 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. We waited. From inside the wall, 3 taps came back. Tap, tap, tap. It felt cold in that hallway. I'm not a man who believes in ghosts. I believe in physics and structural engineering. I figured there had to be a logical explanation. A squirrel, a woodpecker, something mechanical. I told Arthur I was going to cut a small hole in the drywall to inspect the interior. He agreed. I got my drywall saw and cut a 6-inch square between the studs where the sound originated. I shone my flashlight inside. There was nothing but the back of the lath and some old wiring. But there was something else. Hanging from a nail on the interior of the stud was a small silver locket. I reached in and pulled it out. It was old, the hinge was rusted shut. I showed it to Arthur. He turned pale. He sat down on his walker and didn't say a word. I asked him if he recognized it. "That belonged to my wife," he whispered. "She's been gone 10 years. I buried her with that." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. I didn't know what to say. I'm a property manager, not a grief counselor. I told him I'd leave the locket with him and I'd patch the wall the next day. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I went back to Building G. I had my bucket of joint compound and my tape. I knocked on Arthur's door. No answer. I used my key. The apartment was empty. Not just empty of Arthur, empty of everything. The furniture, the rugs, the peppermint smell. It looked like no one had lived there for months. I ran back to my office and pulled the file for Unit 304. The file said Unit 304 had been vacant since 2014. Arthur had passed away in his sleep that year. I went back to the unit. I stood in the hallway where I had cut the hole. The hole was gone. The drywall was smooth, painted, and aged to match the rest of the wall. There was no sign I had ever been there with a saw. I still manage that building. I don't go into Building G after dark. And I never answer the maintenance requests for noises in the walls anymore. I just mark them as resolved and move on. Some things don't need to be fixed.